accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
All right, fellow Owens, you're tuned in to the podcast of OA, episode number 194. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and we're going to have some great Green Lantern chat this episode. We're doing something a little bit different. We're not doing a comic book review. We're not doing necessarily a character spotlight, but we're going to, Phil and I are going to count down our top 5 Green Lanterns of all time. And we've each composed our 5-character list, and we're going to count them down, and we don't know what each other has chosen. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Some great Green Lantern chat. My friend Phil, thanks for joining me again. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one, man. I was thinking about it. It's like, sometimes it does take a break to just to talk about a book that comes out, whatever week it does, or doing a retro review is always fun. But, putting that stuff aside and being able to just have an open conversation is also good too, because, everybody who listens, we all have our favorites. So, and you and I have never, we get the gist of who we like, each other likes as Green Lantern, but, we don't truly know who our top 5 list is. So yeah, that's going to be a good time. Hey, wait a minute. Are we doing it 1 to 5 or 5 to 1?
I think we're going to do it 5 to 1. Okay.
So what I recommend we do is you do your 5th, and then I'll do my 5th, and then vice versa.
That's exactly what I had in mind. So that's great. I also was kind of toying with maybe we should make guesses as to what each other were doing, but I thought, nah, that'll just slow us down.
That's a tough one. And I also had trouble categorizing. I was there's sub parts of that character that could be, okay, well, that's my favorite character, 3, but a sub part of that character would be like a 3.1. You know what I mean? I was like, no, I'm just going to stick to the 5, and that's it.
My wife and I were talking about it earlier, and she goes, well, how many different versions of Hal do you have in your top 5?
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just it, because I was actually talking to a guy at work. He sometimes reads comics or whatever, and we were talking about the top, our favorites or whatever, and I had mentioned that. I was like, there's so many versions of such and such that I like that I just don't know which one I'd pick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun stuff. So before we get into all that stuff, some Green Lantern news. I just want to give a big shout out to Daniel and our Green Lantern book club. So they get together on Skype periodically and talk about different books. On Wednesday, June 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Green Lantern Book Club is going to get together and talk about Red Lanterns issues 7 through 12. So if you're interested, go on to Skype and look for a handle by the name of bookclubofoa@gmail.com and shoot an email to that address and let Daniel know you're interested, because we'd love to have more people join in. I know I myself have not had a chance to get involved yet, but I love seeing how Daniel has taken this and really turned it into something fun. It's basically just good Green Lantern chat with Green Lantern fans talking about what they love. So that's the next one.
I need to text him. I want to get on there sometime, because I think it'd be a good time. And just the school year has just been, how it is, and it's like, I think over the summer, I think I'm gonna, if he does another one, I think I might spot in on it. I think it'd be a good time. I need a break from everything and do something different too.
I think he's going to be doing a Showcase 22 pretty soon too.
That would be cool. That would be a good time.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and do that as well. My life has just been too hectic to be able to do much of anything besides work around the house and sitting down with you, my friend, and having a good conversation.
Well, maybe we should plan to try to do it together. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Some other Green Lantern news that's out right now. I don't know if people have seen it, but an actor by the name of Jeremy Irvine has been cast as Alan Scott for the HBO Max series. So we have 2 of the main characters cast for the show. Also in August, there's going to be a Green Lantern annual, but it's interesting. Usually the annual is written by the same people who write the main series, but this is the same creative team that wrote and did the whole Jessica Cruz story in Future State, and the annual kind of picks up on that whole plot, and it deals with Jessica dealing with the Sinestro Corps. So
that's going to be cool. I saw you posted that on Instagram. I was like, yeah, that's going to be a good time to see her and to cross the Corps. It's going to be fun.
It can be really interesting. And speaking of Jessica Cruz, right now Funko is doing their what they call Funkoween, which is where they're getting ready for the Halloween stuff. We're 6 months or so away from Halloween, not quite, about 5 months, and they are doing a whole event of revealing a bunch of products for that part of the year. And they're doing this really kind of neat thing. They're kind of embracing Hispanic heritage and doing a thing called Dia de los DC. Which is basically doing Day of the Dead stuff. And there are a line of Funko Pops featuring Hispanic characters. For example, there's a glow-in-the-dark Bane and so on. Well, there's a Jessica Cruz Pop that has like a skeleton on the outside. That kind of thing. It looks like a lot of fun. A lot of fun stuff.
I'll get it. Definitely going to get it.
And actually, I think it's already up for pre-order now. You can pre-order it at different places. And
right now.
they also, we finally are getting a Hal Jordan figure in the DC Multiverse line from Todd McFarlane. Not a real good picture yet. It's only been out in previews, and I got myself a copy of the magazine and trying to get as good of a picture as I can, but it's on grainy black background and it's not very detailed. I'm hoping to get a digital picture soon of it. But what they've done is, rather than just release it as a single figure, they're bundling it with a Dawnbreaker figure. So I'm sorry, Phil, you've got to buy a version of Batman to get your Hal Jordan figure.
Yeah. We made that comment on Instagram the other day. I'm okay with that though. That was kind of fun. And I mean, I get it. Your point you made was hilarious. I started cracking up when you responded to it.
Oh, yes, I'm just talking about how they can't sell a Hal figure without putting a Batman figure in it. And I was like, no. What it is they know the Hal figure is going to sell like gangbusters. So they're bundling a second figure to make you spend more money so they can make more money on it.
Way to be diplomatic. That's awesome.
But anyway, so let's take a quick pause, and we've got a Know Your Core segment, and then we're going to come back and talk about our top 5 members of the Green Lantern Corps.
All right. All right, fellow Owens, welcome back to another segment of Know Your Core. This week we got a character by the name of Rori Stroh. First appearance was in Green Lantern Volume 2, Number 9, December of 1961. Character created by John Broome and Bill Kane. He is the protector of Sector 1234. Rori Stroh was born on Rogira, one of the most scientifically advanced civilizations in the universe. His parents named him after Rory Dag, one of the founding Green Lanterns, and Rori Stroh does his best to live up to his namesake. His ongoing experiments with black holes have caused waves in the scientific community, some claiming he is playing with forces bigger than the Guardians of the Universe themselves. If they allowed themselves to feel emotion, the Guardians would find this humorous, for there are few forces bigger than them in the universe. Rori Stroh served the Green Lantern Corps during the Power War, repelling the Cordian invasion of Oa, and it is assumed he was active during the Sinestro Corps War as well. And there you are, Owens, another cool member of the Green Lantern Corps, Rori Stroh.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
All right, Phil. Well, this is going to be a lot of fun. I don't think I have had as difficult of a time putting together a list as I have this one. Trying to, out of all the awesome, incredible characters in the Green Lantern Corps from over 80 years of publication, is really difficult. I had a real hard time narrowing it down. How about you?
I did too. I struggled with a few because I had to really kind of do a deep dive. It's like, okay, well, who really interests me the most, and who stands out the most to me? I mean, most people who know me or know you will probably guess are obvious, but there's a couple on mine that I actually was surprised that I was like, okay, yeah, they need to be included on here.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise. I mean, I found characters that I really enjoy, but when I had to sit back and look at, well, this isn't just the characters that I enjoy that I'm seeing in print now, but what about all the characters that we've seen before? And some of these characters have a lot of history that predates the Johns era that, are different than how we've seen them since Rebirth and all that stuff. So it was an interesting exercise to go back and try to really figure out which ones were our best and most favorite ones. And for me, after I got done, I was like, well, I'm not surprised at all with my list. But for me, the number 5, well, I gotta do some honorable mentions. These were ones that just missed the list. Goran's Son, Space Ape, Muck Muck, Lara, and Mogo were ones that just missed the cut. I had started out with a top 10, and those were what rounded out my top 10. But anyway, my number 5 is Arisia Robb. Now, Arisia Robb debuted back in 1981 in Tales of the Green Lantern Corps, and she has a bit of a controversial history in that she originally appeared like a young humanoid girl, and she really had a big case of hero worship towards Hal. And at one point, they decided they wanted to do a romance between these two characters, and so they had Arisia basically will herself to age her body to match how her body would have aged on her own planet. In other words, her planet, apparently they age very, very slowly. So even though she looked like a teenage girl, she was much older than that. So she matured her body to match her mental age. But at the time, it was very controversial because, it looked like to the average reader that Hal's kind of messing around with a young girl. And that romance fizzled out. And when Jeff Johns took over the book, he kind of touched on their past relationship, but it's been kind of ignored more than anything else. But what I loved about Arisia Robb was that her whole family history is tied into the Green Lantern Corps. Her father was a Green Lantern. Her grandfather was a Green Lantern. So she's basically got that whole pressure of, I have to live up to the family name kind of thing. She was also the first female of her family to get the power ring. So there was all of that dynamic thrown in together. And that was really interesting. At one point, she ended up, after Emerald Twilight and all that, she ended up being a backup character in Guy Gardner's book.
Mm-hmm.
A neat character. So she's my number 5.
Good. It's funny. One of your honorable mentions was one of my honorable mentions, Mogo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed Mogo. All right, so my number 5, I'm going to go with Sodom Yacht. He's always been way up there on my list of favorite lanterns. I love his Daxamite heritage. I like how it's associated with Superman and the Kryptonians. I always thought there was a good story arc they could have done there, but missed the bill on that one. And Sodom Yacht really isn't like, he hasn't been in any animated series. I don't think he was in that Green Lantern animated at all. But he's one of those characters that hasn't come and gone. I remember mentioning him many times in our podcast about, does anybody know where Sodom Yacht is? It's like, but I've always loved the character. I thought he played a great role in the Sinestro Corps War. He was part of Brightest Day, but he was my number 5. Honorable mentions, Mogo was one of them. I have to give my nod to Simon Baz, honorable mention. I'm just kidding. For real. Honorable mentions, Boudica. I like Boudica. I especially liked when she was an Alpha Centurion, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So there it is. My number 5.
I think it's neat that your number 5 and my number 5 were romantically linked together.
I know, it's kind of funny.
That is funny. So my number 4 is Salak. And Salak debuted in 1982, and everybody kind of has seen Salak as the administrator of the Green Lantern Corps, but that isn't how he started out. He was a regular Green Lantern back in the day, but he was very much a loner, and he didn't like to socialize with other people. And one of his best friends was Chip. And when Chip died, he kind of didn't know what to do with himself. And I don't know if you remember, Phil, but did you ever read any of the Green Lantern issues where Hal traveled to the future and took on this identity of Paul Manning?
No, I don't think I. What? How long ago was that?
This was way back in the Silver Age. So John Broome had this set of stories where Hal would go to the future and he wouldn't necessarily remember who he was. And the rest of the people would see him as this character called Paul Manning. And he would go back and forth between the future and the 20th century. And he'd have these adventures in the future as well. It was one of the kookiest plots that they had running for a little while. But at one point, Salak takes Hal's place and goes to the future and marries a human.
Interesting.
Because they still see him as human. But he was a really neat character before he became the cleric, and now obviously he's the cleric as well. And Aricia, we did see her in different animated versions, and Salak we've seen in different animated versions, but most notably probably in Green Lantern the animated series. But I always loved the design and kind of the stuffiness and the prim and properness of Salak, with that little bit of a gruffy exterior.
You're right. He does kind of act that way. And he's always serious about his job, too.
Yes.
Yeah. That's funny. Salak, huh? That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Any honorable mentions on 4, or are you just going to leave that one?
No, the ones I listed were what rounded out my top 10.
I gotcha. That's fair. All right. Well, I guess number 4 for me, and this moment might surprise you. Saronic Natu.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Yeah. She's a great character.
Yeah.
I wish we knew where she were.
Yeah. Really deep character. Yeah, where is she now? I mean, they don't even mention her or whatever. I'll mention this. I feel another failed story arc that she can be included on. I like the father-daughter relationship with her and Sinestro. I've always thought that dynamic was pretty unique. She stays true to her beliefs without her father, his authoritarianism overtaking her. But yeah, I think she's been great. I liked her in the Green Lantern Corps. I liked her when she was in the Sinestro Corps, both ways. The relationship between her and Kyle was I thought it was kind of cool. I felt like there could have been more there, but they never really did hash that out. And then Kyle came off looking like a crying baby. But yeah, she was my number 4.
Yeah, I always liked the storyline, especially in the beginning when she first got the ring, because her own people didn't want her to get the ring and kind of rebelled against her because of the fact that the ring represented Sinestro's heritage and legacy, and she didn't know she was Sinestro's daughter. So it was such a that reveal and her reaction, I thought was fantastic. So yeah, that's a good call. Good call.
Yep. That's a good one.
So my number 3 goes all the way back to 1961 in Green Lantern number 6, Tomar-Re. Tomar-Re was the first alien member of the Green Lantern Corps that we ever saw, and is a Zudarian, and he's been followed in his legacy by his son, Tomar-2. But Tomar-Re, the Zudarian race, was always interesting to me. It was a very interesting story when Tomar-Re talked about how he felt like he failed Krypton because he was trying to rescue Krypton and he'd kind of gone off to try to find a solution. And he'd found a way to keep Krypton from exploding, but he didn't get back in time. And I thought that was really interesting. And there was just a neat brotherhood between Tomar-Re and Hal. And something that really carried forward when they did Green Lantern the animated series. I just thought that they did such a neat job of capturing Tomar-Re because he died during Crisis on Infinite Earths. He hasn't been around for a long time. Now, we've seen him as a Black Lantern, and we've seen him in the Emerald Space when, Hal died, and he was in Emerald Space. He got to talk to Tomar-Re, and he conveyed that message of Tomar-Re's, how proud he was of Tomar-2, brought it back to Tomar-2. From Emerald Space, which I thought was a neat storyline. But I've always loved the look of the character. I love how Jeffrey Rush's voice they used in the Green Lantern movie for him. I love the character. I love the look. And for me, I love the sci-fi element of the Green Lantern Corps, and Tomar-Re being the first member of the Corps that Hal encounters just kind of holds a special place in my heart.
Well, we just talked about an issue that brought up the fact of one of the worlds, which was Krypton, being one of the worlds that fell.
Yep, one of the Crux worlds.
Crux worlds, that's right. And the Lantern Corps were to blame for it. That's kind of a unique twist on that whole thing, because you always think, I don't know, I always felt like Krypton and Superman were self-contained and it didn't have an impact on anything else. But that kind of uniquely draws in the Green Lantern Corps to that story world.
Yeah, and I did like how Robert Venditti picked up on that whole thing and made that kind of a subtext to Zod's hatred of the Green Lanterns when Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, when they had that whole story arc with Zod building a new Krypton, and the Green Lanterns show up to kind of stop him, and he's like, well, who are you to stop me? And he had this big hatred of the Green Lantern Corps because of what happened. And I thought, boy, that's perfect. You know, I thought that was great on Robert Venditti's part to pluck that little piece of continuity and expand on it.
Well, and not only that, but including Zod in the Lantern mythos was kind of cool too. He fits well in there.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, so I'm on to my number 3, right?
Yep.
All right, it's going to be Alan Scott.
Good call.
Yeah. Now we stay true to Alan Scott. I think his origin is unique to the Green Lantern lore. I think it has more weight to it than what they could have utilized with the character, and hopefully, with seeing how looks like DC Comics is utilizing his presence a little bit more these days, I feel like there's a lot that can play out with that. Creator, I can't say any good words, but I mean, Martin Nodell, just top notch, great guy. I loved reading the early stuff. If you haven't checked it out, there's a whole website devoted to him and his family. Just Google it, Martin Nodell. It'll probably come up one of the top hits. The kid putting it together is class act, man. He's doing a great job on it, keeping all his family stuff intact. And Alan Scott, I just feel like there's a lot with Jade. I mean, there's so much you can use with Jade, and there's so much that can be used to explore. And his early stuff is just really, really cool. I mean, it reads like a Green Lantern book, but even though he's not associated, I always felt like that was a misstep to where he should be associated in some kind of fashion.
Now, if you go to the Blog of Oa website, on the right-hand side underneath the information about the book club is a link to the Martin Nodell family website.
There it is, yeah.
So feel free to go there to link over and get to the site. But yes, a nice young man has been working on that site, and I'm really excited to see what comes out. I think we talked about it in one episode. There's an actual audio interview with Martin Nodell, which is really neat to listen to.
It really is. It's just these creators. It's just nice that these creators are getting more spotlight on what they've done. I mean, the whole even the documentaries, like the Bill Finger documentary and stuff like that. It's nice that their credits going back to them. And this even stems from the whole Siegel-Schuster court battle with Superman.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and even though Alan Scott isn't necessarily tied to the Green Lantern Corps, certainly we wouldn't have the Green Lantern Corps in the Silver Age mythology if it wasn't for Alan Scott. And, the oath carried over. Alan had his own oath at one time, but that was rewritten to the oath that we all know so very well. And when Julius Schwartz redid Green Lantern and brought it forward into a sci-fi concept, he kept the oath. That was one of the things that carried over, which was a nice touch. But yeah, you can't go wrong with Alan Scott. That's for darn sure.
Nope.
So my number 2 is a fan favorite, Kilowog.
Wait a minute, number 2 or number 3?
Number 2. We just did number 3.
Oh, we just did number 3. Oh, that's right. You're number 2. Okay.
So my number 2 was Kilowog. He debuted in 1986. And, it's funny because I was thinking, boy, I thought he'd been around a lot longer because he's been such a mainstay in the Green Lantern Corps characters and used in so many different things, from the Green Lantern movie to the Justice League cartoon to pretty much every Green Lantern animated appearance there's been. Kilowog is factored in some way, shape, or form. He is such a fan favorite, and it seems like he's been used to have good relationships with every Earth Lantern that he's encountered so far. There's some kind of a special relationship there. I think still to this day, one of my favorite things with Kilowog and Hal Jordan in particular is the whole Robert Venditti thing where Hal was going to take the fall for the Corps, and he goes down and he's going to steal Krona's gauntlet, and Kilowog shows up knowing what Hal's going to do because he knows him so well, and it's like, you're not going to do this unless you can get past me. And so the two of them fight, and then there's this embrace at the end of the two of them, which I thought was so good. And
that was the Renegade storyline, one of my favorites.
It was the kickoff of the Renegade storyline. Very, very true. And Kilowog he has such a tormented past. He's the only survivor of his race, Bolivik's Vic, and that race was the whole home planet was destroyed by Sinestro. So it adds a whole nother layer of his hatred of Sinestro. Such an awesome character. I think one of the other favorite things I had was the whole thing where Jeff Johns designed our Kilo to be kind of the exact opposite of Kilowog. And so when the two of them are fighting during Sinestro Corps War, I thought was so cool. But there's just been so many great moments with Kilowog over the years. I was surprised when I was looking up the dates for some of these. I just felt like he'd been around forever, and he really hasn't. But just such an awesome creation of a character that has had such a lasting legacy for a character that hasn't been around that long. He's creation of Steve Englehart and Joe Staton.
That's right, you poozers. Yeah, and his one-liners are great. And even his characterization in the movie wasn't half bad. I felt like they could have done more with him, but I mean it was decent.
Yeah, they did an okay job.
Good choice, Kilowog. Yeah, I don't know where he would rank him if I had a top 10 or whatnot. I don't know if he'd be high up there or not. Anyway, so number 2 on me, right?
You're 2.
2. Gonna go with Jessica Cruz. Yep, she's I got stuck on that probably when Forever Evil was teased. And that was when that silhouette picture of her was coming out, and I was like, I remember thinking to myself back then, I was like, okay, so they're going to create another Earth Lantern and it's going to be a female. I said, I felt like, well, this is going to contradict what you usually say, right? There's so many others they could do stories with, why create a new one, right? And while I do agree with some of that, I also have to stick true to how I felt like the character was being created for a new age of a female Lantern. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Especially now, since she's become so popularized in the cartoon. She's utilized in a lot of space. Justice League Odyssey, while I read some of it, I felt like the writers didn't get her character right. So I obviously didn't read all those issues, but I like her past. I like how she carries her anxiety as one of her factors into overcoming fear to get the willpower to be a Green Lantern. I think she's unique, and as far as the Earth Lanterns go. Her Green Lantern's run with Simon Baz, everybody knows how I feel about Simon Baz, but I will say, they were a good pairing in those particular issues, but I felt like she carried a lot of it, and I think that's because of her popularity rise. So she's my number 2.
Cool.
Yep.
So my number 1, Kyle Rayner. No, kidding.
I knew it. I knew it all along.
No, my number 1 goes to Hal Jordan. Obviously, no surprise to anybody who's ever listened to this show. Debuted in 1959. He's the one that's kind of carried the mythology on his shoulders all these years, and I don't know how you can be any better than Hal. He really embodies everything it means to be a Green Lantern, and I can't say enough about the character, so I'm not going to even try. But for me, the entire Green Lantern universe revolves around that character. And to me, my favorite periods of time were when it was just Hal and the aliens. I enjoyed the sci-fi concepts. When you talked earlier about Guardians of the Galaxy being, I think we were talking off mic about Guardians of the Galaxy and how Green Lantern could be like Guardians of the Galaxy. And when I think of it, that's what I think of. I think of Hal and a bunch of aliens doing some really cool stuff. And the more bizarre the aliens, the better. To me, that's what makes it interesting. I don't need to have more than one Earth Lantern from my perspective. I'd rather see the aliens get a chance to shine and see what's really cool about them. But Hal, as I've mentioned before, if it wasn't for Hal, I probably wouldn't be here. My connection with that character is very deep and goes back a very long time in my life, and so he will always be number one in my book.
See, and I think that's something like some of the fandoms that you listen to and some of the people that talk about their favorite characters and stuff. And I'm sure many of them are true to their nature when they have like you do with Hal Jordan, and how it changed your life and and how that was an impact on you. It's so great of impact that it's embedded itself into your philosophy. And I feel like that's missed with a lot of fandoms because I feel like they only know the character and its short value because they haven't invested their time into it. You can read a number one issue and say, yeah, I kind of like this character, but you can't tell me that after reading 10 issues of that character, you wouldn't say, I don't like that character, or wow, I really got a good in-depth look at that character in 10 issues. And when you invest so much time in reading these people, like Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne and everything, you get to know them. You get to know who they are. And yours was personal. And some of the fans that claim that my favorite's this, my favorite's that, they don't all hold that same value as it does with you because of what's happened in your past. But a lot of them do, or a lot of them are relatable. Especially like Jessica Cruz and anxiety and, or maybe a cultural identity, as far as they relate because of their origin, or their whatever nation that they come from, Kyle Rayner, and his heritage. People like that, Jon Stewart and the African-American community. There's all relatable context there to characters. But you and I have always talked about how, we have our favorites, we love them, and we don't have our favorites. But that doesn't mean we don't love them. It just means that they're not our favorites, And then there's the ones that we just don't even talk about,
Yeah, I think, a lot of people only know Hal from certain things, or they have a preconceived notion about the character. I mean, I've heard people talk about him like he's some kind of a jock. Well, Hal was never really a jock. Sure, he was in good shape because he was a pilot, but he was never a bro, if you know what I mean.
Right. He wasn't one of those guys from Revenge of the Nerds.
Very good. That's a great analogy.
Right.
It was never that at all.
He never acted like that.
And he was never, one of the things I didn't like was how Johns portrayed him when he did the New 52 relaunch of Justice League and made Hal seem so silly, that he was so impulsive that he didn't think through things. It wasn't that. It's always to me that Hal's way he processes decision making, because he's a test pilot, is so fast, and he doesn't care enough about himself. He would rather put himself in harm's way to protect somebody else. So if it came off as impulsive, well, yeah, it's somewhat impulsive, and there's a lot of bravado there because he's covering up other things. There's a lot more under the skin that usually we don't get a lot of exploration of. And it takes that long-term reading to really understand it. I often look at like characters like Indiana Jones. Do you really know much about Indiana Jones? No, not really. But yet you know who he is and what he represents from what you've seen in the films. But yet there's not a deep character exploration. And for me, Hal's the same way. My understanding of that character comes from over 40 years of reading the character.
That's what I mean. When you got that much of a library built up on somebody you've read over the course of time in many different variations, that's a lot. That's a lot of ingestion of all this material, and Superman's been like that to me, and and for that matter, the Green Lantern characters, which brings up my number one, which is yours, Hal Jordan. Now I don't have a personal connection in the way that you do, but I have a personal connection in a way that, when I first started reading books, it was Superman came first, and then of course I read Hal Jordan afterwards. Now, I did get into the Kyle Rayner run. That's where I started picking up on a lot of it. but the Kyle Rayner run, the only thing it did for me is it made me realize how much I missed Hal Jordan, sadly. But I did gain a liking for Kyle Rayner. I mean, he's definitely in my top 10. I do enjoy him. But Hal Jordan's always been my guy too, and you talk about, how he's impulsive and stuff. Well, I mean, I would assume that when you're integrated in such a way that you're a fighter pilot, a reactionary response is probably going to be anybody's go-to measure. I mean, it would have to be. You're going to react to a situation as quickly as possible because if you don't, you're going to get tagged.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's how I've always felt with Hal when he's in these situations, and answer the questions later, But what's that old saying goes? There's an old saying at school, you do something and you pay for it later, it's just the way it goes. And anyway, so yeah, Hal's my favorite, and he rounds out my top 5, and I kind of figured yours and ours were going to be the number ones, but hey, I bet everybody on here could have done that.
To me, that he is the most iconic version of the character, and definitely not cardboard, despite what some writers would say.
No, he's got more depth than that. I mean, you want to talk about cardboard? I could spout off about 10 characters that are well beyond what Hal Jordan could ever be.
All right.
Anyway, yeah, that was cool, man. That was fun.
That was a fun exercise. So, I hope our listeners listen to this and they share with us their top 5.
Yeah,
that'd be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my friend. Well, let's take a break and come back, and we've got some listener feedback because my power ring is already starting to blink.
All right.
What's up, ring slingers? It's the Emerald Enthusiast. Join us on the Multiverse Musings Podcast Network as we cover all the happenings in the DC and Marvel universes and beyond, including the Emerald Echo Podcast, where we cover all the exploits of those who wield the green light. And also join us on YouTube for the Emerald Echo Vidcast, where your hosts Adam and I cover all the events that involve your favorite heroes, the Green Lantern Corps. So remember to join us on iTunes, Podbean, and YouTube for the Emerald Echo.
All right, here we go. Some listener feedback. My power ring is flashing. Ring, play the first message.
Our first message is from Stuart, who's contacting us from YouTube. He's commenting on our last episode. Commencing transmission in 3, 2, 1.
Definitely liked The Last Ride more than GL number 2. While The Last Ride is a bit, been there done that, especially with the GLs, I have faith in Zdarsky as a writer. I 100% agree with Phil that I feel this needs more issues or at least extended pages. I want to see the character work being done because this universe has a lot of potential.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, Last Ride was cool. Me and Myron was talking about that. That's one of the ones that I think one of the very few that we're actually buying or getting from DC these days. I mean, I dropped a lot of my titles recently, so Green Lantern and Last Ride are pretty much the only 2 DC books that I'm going to be reading. And sadly, this is going to be a 6-issue arc, Myron?
I haven't seen how long it is. It doesn't have a out of 6 or out of any particular number. I was looking at the solicitations that just came out for August, and it didn't say. So I can't imagine it's an ongoing. Just because it seems like it's a story that definitely has a finite end to it. Oh, it is 6 issues. Excuse me. I think.
Is it 6? Yeah.
Oh, 7 issues. 7 issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like you, I think this is, for me, it's the only book I'm buying from DC right now. So I'm all on board for it. It does kind of feel like a been there, done that in terms of the fact that the Justice League is broken up. But what I really liked about that first issue in particular was the character work. I think the plot part is almost secondary to the character work. And I'm okay with that because I think it's neat to explore the dynamics between these characters. They're the most iconic characters in the DC pantheon. So anything that explores their relationships to me is a win.
It's funny because Chip Zdarsky, the writer of that book, he's one of my good friends and listeners, probably my best friend. Which I want to say congratulations, Brian. Him and his girlfriend just got engaged.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, he's a big Zdarsky fan, and it's funny because I got to read this little text he sent to me. He said, "Hey man, I'm getting caught up on the podcast today, and I just heard you read your first Zdarsky book. He's a killer writer that's written Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man Life Story, which is amazing, and a lot of other stuff. Which he tends to tell me, come to Marvel, my friend, or check out his Image book, Stillwater, which I want to say is like 5 or 6 issues deep right now." And it's funny because him and I got to relate. He always wants me to come over to Marvel, and I'm trying to get him to come to DC. But, he's right. I mean, I felt like that's part of what intrigued me the most about Last Ride was his writing. And I'm anxious to see where the story's going to go, and I'm anxious to see how his writing is going to develop.
Yeah, I agree. So, Power Ring, go ahead and give us our next message.
The next communication is from JP, who's also contacting us using YouTube and commenting on our last episode. Commencing transmission in 3, 2, 1.
The Last Ride was a last-minute pickup for me, and I am glad I did. I am still enjoying the Green Lantern book, and am looking forward to issue 3 to see how the dust settles. I'm trying to remember from Future State, but did the Guardians die? With the way this issue ends, it seems everyone outside of the Team Lantern shield was destroyed, including the Guardians. Also coming out of Bendis' Superman run, United Planets has its origins in the Legion of Superheroes mythology. Currently, I believe Bendis is using the UP in his Justice League run, and Philip Kennedy Johnson is for sure using the UP in his Superman run. I actually like that Thorne is trying to explain where the GLs are in the 31st century through this UP GL storyline.
Hey JP, thanks for that message. I was thinking about the Guardians, and they really haven't shown what happened in Future State with the Guardians. But I agree with you. It almost implies in this second issue of Green Lantern that anything that wasn't protected by Kelly Quintala's force bubble might have very well died. So could they all be dead? They very well could be. And yeah, the United Planets does definitely tie into the whole Legion of Superheroes mythology and stuff. So we'll see. We'll see how this all pans out as things go along.
Yeah. It's funny. I like how he talks about the United Planets tying in on the Bendis run. I didn't really... I don't know. I kind of dropped the Superman titles with Bendis. I mean, they kind of like teetered off for me, so I didn't really stick with it. But it's cool. I don't know. Maybe that's some kind of short tie-in.
Yeah, I don't know. Legion to me has always been... I've never really been a big fan of Legion of Superheroes, so I kind of stayed away from that. I don't understand the reason to tie anything into it because it's set in a future that isn't set in stone. So I don't know. Whatever.
All right, Ring. Well, let's see what our next message brings us.
We have 2 messages from Michael, which I am going to combine into one. He's commenting on the current state of the comics industry. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
First off, I wanted to say how much I love the podcast. Listening to you guys talk about comics and Green Lantern helps me with my comic fix. The past few years of me buying comics had me depressed every time I picked my pull and hold. The comics I was reading at the time were heavy X-Men titles, me being an X-Men fan dating back to the early 80s. And a lot of DC books like Superman, Batman, Flash, and let's not forget my favorite, Green Lantern. While reading these books, I saw the agenda being pushed on me and the heavy left-wing politics that were portrayed as the good guys and the right-wing politics as the bad guys. I was spending over $300 a month on comics at the time and had just finally had enough this past July. My focus has now turned to the older books where gender and race changes were not the norm in comics. The homosexual lifestyle was not paraded around as some acceptable behavior, and identity politics did not permeate our everyday lives. Books, in general, were family-friendly and something that could help your children learn to read and have fun reading also. Sadly, those days are gone, but I do think that one day those days will return with good family-friendly writing and stories that all can enjoy. I mean, it can't get too much worse, can it? Well, either way, until it does get better, both companies have lost a long-time collector and my money to boot. A follow-up to my last email. I don't want to be the downer man in the room. I do generally love comics and have grown up around them all my life. I just want to be able to pass them down to my sons and let them have the same joy I had when I first read them. Here's to future emails from me with questions about the Green Lanterns and just have some fun conversations with my online friends. Your friend and fellow Owen, Mike.
All right, Michael. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack with with your comments, and Myron and I talk off mic sometimes about the state of the comic book industry nowadays, and it's so. I mean, I feel like sometimes it's a pandering aspect to appeal to too many bases, and while I'm always for representation, it doesn't matter what it is. Representation is for representation's sake. It shouldn't be like focused on because that's something that needs to be said. Okay, well we need to put all of our energy into this space because it's being neglected into this space. Well, I don't understand why it can't just be done in as a whole. I mean, inclusion is part of everything, and it doesn't matter where you fall to. So, to me, it seems like a no-brainer that you would just, I don't know, the whole inclusion aspect just mystifies me when it comes to the comic book industry, and you look like you've read a lot of titles and stuff like that. You're going back to the 80s just like I am. Of course, Myron goes back a little bit further than that.
Speak up, my hearing aid wasn't up very far.
I remember spending tons of money back on comics when I was coming in the 80s, especially going into the 90s, because I mean the 90s was a plethora of over sexuality when it came to comic books, and and I was just buying a lot of stuff. Image was big back then, and I was probably spending about $300 a month myself on these books. It was a lot. There was a lot of intake back in the 90s, man.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a time when I was buying almost the entire DC catalog every month because I felt like the universe was very cohesive, and I wanted to know about every nook and cranny of it, and that has certainly changed. And I agree. There's been kind of a, I don't know whether it's an overcompensation for a lack of representation, but it seems like now we've kind of gone overboard in the other direction. We're overcompensating a little bit, and I think there's been some backlash to that. When you look at the reactions to some of the casting and how characters are being changed and so on, it's very off-putting. I think we as comic book fans, when we see a character that we have a connection to being presented on screen, whether it's small screen, large screen, whatever, we're looking for the character that we fell in love with, the character that the intellectual property is what we are familiar with. And then when they change it, there's almost that disenfranchisement connection to that. And it's tough. It really is tough. And I have a problem with people who put the politics in their books to kind of lecture the reader or basically promote their perspective at the disadvantage or the discouragement of other points of view. I think there's room at the table for everybody, regardless of their perspectives and points of view, and it's through dialogue that we become better people and stronger people as a whole. And if you quash any voice to a point that they don't have a space at the table, what are we really doing? So I agree with some of the things that Michael says, and there's some things that maybe I don't agree with quite as much, but at the same time, we all have a place at the table, and when we have stories that pander to a particular point of view at the expense of another, to me that's problematic. And
even something as simple as like automatically resorting an actor to just like ultimate criticism when you haven't even given the person a chance to play the part. It's like, people trolled all over Michael Keaton, and now he's regarded as one of the better Batman, or whatever. And it's like the whole casting with this Green Lantern Corps, and I knew this was coming, and you could see it coming from a mile away. Who it doesn't matter who they cast, you're gonna have this fandom that's going to be harsh on whoever's put in that situation. And the thing that I don't agree with you, I don't care if you want to be critical of it. That's fine. That opens up the conversation, like you had said, but in a way, these people are in a way that they demean them on social media, to the point of some of them have to leave social media because I don't know, it's not fair. I mean, even at its base, if you go back to Ryan Reynolds playing Green Lantern, disregard all you know about that whole movie. But as far as Ryan Reynolds and Hal Jordan, I thought it was a pretty good job. They could have done a little bit better with his characterization, but I thought his demeanor was kind of on point with what Hal Jordan was. Take away the rest of the movie, that's a different story. But I don't know, man. I wish people would be more open-minded to things that are happening and give people a chance before you crucify them.
Well, it's like when you look at the Ryan Reynolds casting, I remember the first thing was Van Wilder's going to be Green Lantern. That was one of the common threads. But I think there's also a backlash when fundamental parts of the characters are changed. Not so much the actor, but the way the character is going to be portrayed. For example, when we talk about the Green Lantern show, none of us, I don't know about you, but I can't picture Guy Gardner as a father and husband.
That's a different kind of story. But then again, maybe it's something different that they're going with.
Right.
But the hardcore group, the hardcore Guy Gardner fans will know that. And if it's not done in a way that's true to the actual character, then they'll lose that fan base.
Exactly. And I think that's what I'm getting back to is we all want, if you're a Guy Gardner fan, as an example, the only Guy Gardner live action you've ever seen was from that god-awful Justice League pilot. And so you've never really seen Guy Gardner. So here's maybe your first and maybe only chance in your lifetime to see Guy Gardner in live action, and they're not portraying him the way that you know him. One could say the same thing about Alan Scott. So
very true.
I understand people that get upset about those kind of things, or race bending or gender bending characters. I'm not a fan of that at all. So, I get this, and it's very discouraging because you want to see the characters you know and love as you know and love them.
Yeah, and it's not like we don't agree with the fact of the representation itself. It's more the fact of, why do that to a character that's already established a base? And why can't you be creative enough to come up with somebody else that could hook people in a way that one did?
Right. I mean, we're seeing Naomi's getting a TV show.
Yeah. I mean, look, she came out of nowhere.
Right. There's ways to build new characters. People keep saying, well, it's too hard to do new characters. Well, geez, we were just talking about Kilowog not too long ago, and he was a new character at one point. He stuck because he was well written and he was written as a good character. New characters can be created. I think that's such a lazy excuse. But to change characters that have a fan base or things that are iconic, to change them for the sake of changing them, because you think you're including someone, well, by changing it, you're also excluding other people.
Yeah, so I think it does a disservice to the industry.
Yep, I agree. So anyway, Power Ring, go ahead and give us our next message.
This next message is from Thomas, and he has feedback on our last episode. Transmission in 3, 2, 1.
Hey Myron and Phil. Hope you guys are doing well. I just wanted to write about a few things I've been thinking about lately. I am liking the new run on Green Lantern, but I totally understand people's issues with the writer's comments. Respectfully, I know this has been and probably will be brought up plenty of times on the show already and don't feel like I need to reiterate it. Also, I too share your feelings about having to watch the power battery be destroyed again. While I was listening to your last episode, I thought it was interesting when you talked about Hal Jordan in the Justice League book looking similar to Alan Scott from Kingdom Come. I have never been clear about what Future State was. I thought it was kind of a Future's End situation, just trying to get a few what-if stories out of the failed 5G initiative, which also I never got a clear understanding of. I bring this up only because if Thorne is just saving face and not wanting to draw attention away from his book by saying Justice League and Green Lantern are connected, what are your thoughts about Green Lantern taking a magical route? I bring up magic because I thought it was interesting in issue 1 of Green Lantern the elemental characters that harass Simon and Kelly bring mention of the Starheart, which I believe hasn't been talked about in a long time, at least in canon stories. I may be completely wrong and please correct me if I am. And they showed them again talking about freeing the heart and magic will return. I just thought that might be an interesting direction if the Lanterns were somehow able to use the Starheart to power their rings, even if it's only a temporary thing, and then that could tie into the Justice League story, why Hal looks kind of like Alan Scott. It would definitely be a different way to change the timeline from Future State. I also may be giving Thorne too much credit, but hey, that's never stopped a guy from coming up with crazy theories only 2 issues in. Keep your power rings charged.
Hey, Thomas, thanks for contacting us. There's a lot of things about Future's End and Future State and what was it. Future State was supposed to be kind of a what if. And if we go to the behind the scenes stuff, there was a whole 5G initiative that you mentioned in your comment as well, where they were going to talk about different generations of the DC universe, and they were going to set the stage for a 5th generation. And so they were going to come up with all these new characters and kind of go forward with them as the ongoing DC universe. And a lot of those things were written, and then the whole thing fell apart. In fact, I saw something recently where Josh Williamson said he was going to leave DC over 5G. And so they're kind of reusing some of that stuff, and it kind of morphed into Future State. And it is a what if, but it's an interesting what if because it's not just stories that are what if stories, but they're stories that are also the potential futures of the DC universe. And as we're seeing, the Green Lantern book is very much following the Future State Green Lantern storyline. Now, Jeffrey Thorne has said that the Future State Green Lantern storyline that he wrote takes place 14 years after issue 2. So his ongoing series is going to fill in the gap between the two. We saw in the Future State book, the first issue I think had the Jessica Cruz story in it. I think it was the first of the 2 issues. And that story is going to be picked up on in the annual that comes out this summer. In August. So some of these elements are there, some aren't. It's kind of confusing because they don't all line up. For example, we saw in Green Lantern number 2 that Kelly Quintana was on Oa when the Central Power Battery went out, but yet in the story that featured Kelly in her own story, she was on Mogo. So some of these things are obviously not going to tie in exactly or at all with what we see coming out. And I think that makes it confusing for readers, that's for sure. I don't know whether I like the idea of Green Lantern going back to the magical stuff. And maybe it's just because I'm such a dyed-in-wool sci-fi guy that I really like the science fiction mythology elements that Julia Schwartz and John Broome put into Green Lantern more so than the magic stuff. But yeah, the fact that Hal is wearing kind of a version of the Alan Scott Kingdom Come outfit in Justice League The Last Ride is interesting when you tie that into the stuff that's going on in the Green Lantern book and the whole thing with the Starheart. So I'm not sure where it's going, but I don't know. Like I said, I'm really just not into the magic stuff myself. But that's me.
Yeah, I'd have to mirror that too. I think the magic entity has its own place with Justice League Dark and characters like Zatanna and John Constantine and stuff. And I like that ensemble kind of set to its side by itself. I've always thought those were unique characters, but lumping the Green Lanterns into that kind of universe, I think they stand alone. To me, I feel like they stand alone with what they do now, and as far as having the properties that the rings adhere to, that individual's willpower, I think that makes it kind of fun and different than the type of just the normal magic universe that you see in DC. So, yeah.
I mean, I like magic characters in general, but I don't like it with my Green Lantern necessarily.
Yep, makes sense. All right, Power Ring. Let's see what our next message says.
Our last message is from Larflee's Cake Factory, and he has some feedback on the last episode. Playing in 3, 2, 1.
Great episode. After issue number 2, I am still enjoying Thorne's run so far, although I do agree with the sentiment you gave that DC has given the keys to the kingdom to a guy who doesn't love the king. I don't think Hal always needs to be the star, but if he is going to be sidelined the whole time, then it would be disappointing. I feel like DC could use the Lanterns so much better if they gave them all a home, kind of like they did with the New 52 when each human Lantern had a comic where they played a big role. I hope they are headed in this direction, with Joe Mullen being in the Future State Justice League and Alan Scott being in Infinite Frontier. But with only one comic for the Lanterns, it seems unlikely. Maybe we should move them to Gotham and then they'll get a lot of love.
All right, thank you, Larflee's Cake Factory. Coolest name ever. I actually want to see this cake factory. Wait, but it's all yours, so I really probably can't see it, right? Anyway, thanks for the episode. Thanks for the accolades. Issue 2 of Thorn's Run. I like it so far. But I need to be fair. So first 2 issues really don't mean much. By 5 or 6, I'll have a good understanding of if this is the kind of book that I'm going to like with the Green Lantern stuff. But I have my criticisms, as does Myron, about the writer and his content. But so far the 2 issues have been cool, and I'm being fair, and I like it. I think it's a neat, unique direction, and I hope to read more. As far as DC Lanterns go, like the full swath of Lanterns, I've always argued that there needs to be a Green Lantern Corps book, and that's the end of my discussion about it. A Green Lantern Corps book itself, I think, sets itself aside from what's going on with other things, with what other lanterns are doing or whatnot. And you can even do it in a 3-story kind of Green Lantern Corps book, and showcase different lanterns and what they're doing. I mean, they could easily tie that in with what's going on with this whole battery going out. You could have a Green Lantern Corps. Well, what's happening to the Green Lantern Corps from this sector that the battery went out? So much storytelling can be had just out of that alone, had forethought been brought into this. But I guess sales dictate what we like nowadays. So, I mean, fandom has only so much say. I think you'd agree, right, Myron?
Yeah. I think really in the end, DC has mismanaged the Green Lantern franchise for quite some time. We had a time during New 52 when we had 5 Green Lantern books. There was a Green Lantern family of books, and the main Green Lantern title outsold pretty much everything except for Justice League and Batman. It outsold Superman. It outsold Wonder Woman. It outsold pretty much everybody. And when Jeff Johns left, not to besmirch the creators that came on, but you didn't bring. They could have brought in and should have brought in bigger names to take that torch and carry it forward and keep it moving. And they shrunk the line, but increased the number of characters, which doesn't serve anyone. So there desperately needs to be more. You and I were going to talk a little bit about the solicitations, and we kind of forgot about it. But here's a shocking statistic. Now, I listen to and watch a channel on YouTube called Thinking Critically, and this is his research. So this is not something I've done. This is based on his research. But if you look at the August DC solicitations, DC is publishing no less than 70 books, which sounds great because, remember, it used to be just 52. We've got 70 books. Now, a lot of them are limited series and so on and so forth. But out of those 70 books, 17 of them, 24% of DC's line in August, star Batman.
Now, is it just Batman or Batman related?
No, that's just Batman. So if you look at the Batman family, 32 out of the 70 books, a whopping 46%, are fronted by Batman family characters.
I've been saying this on this podcast all the time. I mean, but the argument always follows, well, Batman sells. I mean, that's what everyone always just thrown in my face when I argue this point.
Well, and my counterpoint has been, is it because Batman sells, or is it because DC is doing such a crappy job with the rest of the properties that people have abandoned them?
Yeah, exactly. But nobody wants to think of it like that. Everybody wants to think of it that everybody likes Batman.
Right.
And I get it, man. I totally get it. Batman's a great character. There's no denying the fact that Batman has a huge base. I mean,
Sure.
You might as well just call him the head of the Justice League at this point.
Sure. I mean, the reality is they can publish 32 books and Batman fans will put forth the money. But the fans that are dying for other things aren't getting what they want. And you look at... And I don't want to get into the whole Jeff Thorne thing. I mean, to me, the guy's a knucklehead, but whatever. But you've got all of these characters, and they are so underserved that those fans are disenfranchised. There are people like me that I don't want to read the main book. I'm reading it for the sake of reviewing it, and that's it. I really don't enjoy it, quite frankly. I think that the writers kind of taking some shortcuts and overlooking some things and ignoring things about how the Green Lantern universe works for the sake of telling a story he wants to sell. But that's my perspective. I just feel like DC has failed to the Green Lantern fans, and you can't blame it on the movie. That's bull.
Oh, that's crap. That was so long ago. We're past that.
Right. And Green Lantern is still very, very popular, but you're not giving Green Lantern fans what they want. I think, you and I have gone on the Lantern Cast every year for a number of years, and we talk about, if we were in charge of the Green Lantern franchise for DC, what would we want to see? And almost unanimously, we all say there needs to be a Green Lantern book, there needs to be a Green Lantern Corps book, there needs to be an anthology book for other characters, and that every one of these characters of the Power Ring, if they're important enough to create that character and put him in your stable of characters, then they deserve to be in a book.
Yeah, agreed. And don't even get me started on the round robin thing, because again,
we didn't even talk about that one.
Yeah, the two titles left are Batman related.
Yep.
And how funny is it that today they came out with an issue? I think DC put out a comic that was that who's left in there? Robins and Suicide Squad, right?
Yeah, there's already a Robin book.
Yeah. So so either number one, you already had a preconceived notion that Robin was going to win because that's what you do. So you already had that writer write that book, or that writer was really, really fast after they found out they won, and they've already put on a book for it. Yeah. You can't tell me that those two winning were a coincidence. Nobody will convince me otherwise.
Right. I think it's also interesting that they did these polls on Twitter and Instagram and DC Infinite.
That was a joke.
The Instagram vote carried everything pretty much, and Twitter was number 2. The voting on DC Infinite was very small, and you have to pay to be part of DC Infinite. Well, the voting for the final 2 is only DC Infinite. So you've limited the audience down to the smallest group of people that were voting in the first place to try to get them to buy your subscription service, which is a really cheap ploy. But then DC Infinite isn't even available around the world, so now you've limited the voting to North America. It's mismanagement on a colossal scale. There's no leadership at DC right now.
No, and I said this. I don't know if I said this before, but I'll reiterate it. A better concept for that ridiculous round robin would have been like, you have all these creators and all these artists that are doing this work to try to get people to say, hey, buy my product or get my product. I want to get my name out there. This is what I'm creating, yada, yada, yada. All those first rounds, you could have done 3 titles apiece with each of those, and you could. And I think you even mentioned to me in a text one time, or do them digitally, because it looks like they're doing a lot of their digital stuff too, with Superman and Wonder Woman and whatnot. See what downloads. You can see the data on how many people and how much those books would be received by people, more than you would by the ones that are going on there to simply vote for something they don't even know what they're voting for.
It would have been far more interesting from my perspective if they had done an anthology book and said, okay, here's some pages from these 4 books. And then in that issue, there's a code, and you go to a website and you type in the code, and then you're allowed to vote.
There's marketing right there. And those are 2 simple ideas, yours and mine, that would have probably been better received by the fandom and the community than a round robin tournament to sit here and say, well, I want a Justice League queer book. Okay, that's fine. I want that representation too. But do you need to minimize it by calling it a Justice League queer book? I mean, I don't know. I'm not in the gay community, so I don't know how that was received just by the name alone. But I'm also interested enough to know, well, I'm interested in these characters. I mean, what about them? I want to know more about them. Oh, right. Wait a minute. Lost in the first round. Thanks a lot.
Well, I also don't want people to vote in this thing if they're not really people who are going to buy the book in the first place. So by limiting the voting audience to those people that are actually going to invest the money to read it and see what it looks like, eliminates I'm going to vote for this because it lines up with my identity politics, or I'm going to vote for this because I want to see this representation, even though I have no intention whatsoever of putting the money down for the book if it gets printed. I just wanted to be able to say that my book won.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I said. Each book has 3. Okay, hey writer, hey artist, give me 3 books, and we'll sell them. and then you collect the data to see what actually hits.
Right.
Hell, by issue 3, you kind of get the gist of, this is something that I would buy. This is something that I would probably purchase, and you don't even have to tag it with $2.99 or $3.99, $1.99. You know,
Yeah.
You're giving the fans something, and they're willing to pay for it. I think with a full swath of that many books, I bet you they would have made a lot of money on top of the fact that they probably would have gained more fandom.
I think it would have been, if to really tie the market into it, instead of expecting people to buy the book, why not on Free Comic Book Day release some of those stories and maybe 2 or 3 different Free Comic Book Day issues, again with the voting code in it, so that people aren't having to spend money, so you're not buying votes, but they still have to have read the book and use the code and make the effort to actually do it, because then you've got the comic buying public that are actually voting for something that they are likely to invest in.
All they got to do is put a QR code in the front of it. They can put that on the front page.
Right.
Here you go, vote. And that brings your community base, right? And not only that, but it's a good marketing ploy, because it also, this is a digital world, Who wouldn't want to scan a QR code? And
right.
Say,
we did a 900 number to vote for the death of Robin way back in the day.
We did mail-ins. They did mail-ins for stuff at one time, I think.
By the way, I did vote to kill him.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
Well, unfortunately, he's got a new book coming out. You didn't do very well.
I didn't, and it didn't stick. Didn't stick. All right. Anyways, thanks so much for your feedback. We enjoy hearing from you guys. And Powering, why don't you tell people how they can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Listen up, all you white circles. This is Drill Instructor Kilowog, and you're listening to the Podcast of Oa. And don't you forget it, boozers.
All right, Myron, episode 194, Free Talk. I had a good time, man. I know that, I don't know what listeners actually think about our comments and stuff like that. So, a lot of them are really nice when they write in and stuff like that. But, and it's okay if you don't agree with the stuff that we say. And I don't expect everybody to agree with everything that comes out of our mouth, except when Myron is speaking about Green Lantern history. That's believable. But outside of that, with our personal opinions and stuff, we've said this many, 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 many times, but I feel like it needs to be said again, Our opinions may differ. That doesn't mean we're different. We like what we like and where our passions are. And, we have our beliefs. That doesn't mean I don't respect yours, because I always will.
Right.
Even if you're a Batman fan.
I always look at it as, we all have our opinions. And when it comes to Green Lantern, I can be its biggest supporter, but I can also be its harshest critic. I'm not going to accept something just because it's got Green Lantern on the label. I'm a huge fan, but I'm not going to accept something I think is subpar. And I don't want to be that grumpy comic book fan that people get turned off because I don't want to go and listen to this show because they're just going to complain about the book. But if I'm going to complain about the book, I'm going to tell you why I don't like it, and you can either agree with it or disagree with it. That's fine. I think no less of you if you like it and you think it's the greatest thing since John Broome. But that's your perspective, and more power to you. But for me,
well, not only that, but complaining is one thing. But when you categorize why you don't like something and the reasons for it, it's not topical. None of what we complain about is topical complaints, except when we come across artwork we don't like. Oh, I don't like that art. That's just a matter of opinion. Art is, art's a tough thing to tackle.
Yeah.
Because everybody is so different when it comes to artwork. But a lot of our complaints come from deep understanding of whatever we're talking about.
Right, and I agree with you, Phil. It's hard to talk and criticize art because art is very subjective. And the only time I would really feel comfortable criticizing art is if it's like Rob Liefeld's Captain America, where it's so it's so disproportionate or it's so bad. I may not like an art style and it may not be for me, but it doesn't mean it's bad art. It may be technically fine. It just may not appeal to my tastes. Right. So I tend to focus more on the writing, because to me, writing is a more, I don't want to say tangible, but it's a more fixed thing.
It carries the weight. I mean, I think the writing carries the weight. I mean, because you can see past artwork. It doesn't matter if you like it or you don't, or be glamorized by it or not. But at the root of it, the narrative and what's taking place in the storyline is where the meat of it is.
Yeah. I mean, there are certain things, like I take exception to the white boots, the ring on the wrong hand. There's certain things that I have real knee-jerk reactions to. But yeah, the writing to me is what I get more critical about. And I hope we don't turn people off. I hope I don't turn somebody off. But
that's not topical either. I mean, it's the same argument with the Superman and the red trunks. It's like,
yeah.
That it's whatever.
Yep. So we'll be back soon. This episode was a little bit longer in terms of coming later in the month, but we will be back in a week or so with commentary on Green Lantern number 3, because that issue will be out. And so until then, I hope everybody in the United States, we're getting ready to celebrate Memorial Day. So I hope everybody remembers why we're celebrating Memorial Day, and thinks a little bit about those who made the ultimate sacrifice so that we can have our cookout on Memorial Day. Until next time, though, please treat each other well, and keep your ring charged, and make every day your brightest day. Take care, guys. The Podcast of Oa is the official podcast of the blog of Oa, and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of Oa and the Podcast of Oa are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.